She was only meant to be the secretary who kept the lists straight, the doors unlocked, the lights burning. But one smoke-filled night in Sonoma, Clara Whitfield walked out of a cedar-lined bathroom wearing a borrowed shirt, a towel, and a ring that was never hers. By sunrise, the internet had given her a new title, the bathroom fiancée. What happens when a private moment is twisted into a public story? When a ring meant as a placeholder becomes a symbol the world refuses to question, can one ordinary woman hold her ground against rumors, boardroom politics, and the quiet grief of a widowed millionaire who suddenly notices her for the first time? This isn't a tale of scandal, but of resilience, of how fire, smoke, and misunderstanding can strip a life bare until all that's left is the choice to stand or to break. So, stay with us as we unfold a story of misperception, quiet strength, and the kind of beginning no one ever sees coming. If this opening already stirs your curiosity, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, because the story you're about to hear might just change how you see second chances. Clara Whitfield blinked against the soft morning light, filtering through the cedar-lined bathroom off the Caldwell Ridge Library. Her hair, damp from a hurried rinse the night before, clung to the back of her neck in dark strands, and a borrowed monogrammed shirt hung loosely over her shoulders. The towel she had wrapped around herself was slipping, yet she hardly noticed. Outside, a faint haze of smoke drifted across the vineyard, softening the rows of sun-streaked grapes with a ghostly gray. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter rotated overhead, its rotors slicing the cool, fragrant morning air. Her phone vibrated on the counter, insistent, demanding attention. With a slow exhale, Clara picked it up, only to freeze at the image glowing on the screen. The photograph captured her hand, the platinum-green ring gleaming awkwardly against her skin. She recognized the angle immediately: the bathroom tiles, the edge of the cedar wall, and the towel loosely draped over her shoulders. The image had been taken without her knowing. It was already circulating, phones buzzing, notifications piling like autumn leaves in the wind. Comments appeared almost instantly, some bemused, some incredulous. And there it was, the moniker that would haunt her for the morning bathroom fiancé. Clara's chest tightened. She traced the ring lightly with her fingertip, feeling its cool, unyielding weight. Not hers. Not Graham's yet somehow. By accident or coincidence, she had become the central figure in an unfolding narrative she did not control. The absurdity of it made her cheeks heat, but beneath that, there was a gnawing panic. What would the staff say? What would the board think? What would the donors conclude before she had a chance to explain anything? She swallowed hard, steadying her breath against the hum of the generators that powered the safe room's lights and small appliances. The room itself was a refuge, a quiet contrast to the chaos already simmering outside the walls. Blankets were folded neatly along a corner bench, oxygen canisters lined up with precision beside the first aid kits, and a few exhausted staff members lay in the back, curled into chairs or on the floor with their jackets as pillows. Clara could hear the faint, rhythmic rise and fall of their breathing, each inhale a reminder that the crisis of the night had left them drained, but still present. She let her gaze drift over them, recognizing the weight of their effort and the quiet courage it demanded. She remembered guiding each guest through breathing checks, directing them to safe spots, reminding them to stay calm as the wildfire smoke brushed the valley. Every small instruction, every whispered reassurance had been hers. And now, that same morning, her private diligence was being transformed into public spectacle. The cool tile beneath her feet sent a shiver up her spine, grounding her in reality. Clara flexed her toes, testing the firmness of her stance. She could almost feel the history of the house beneath the tile cedar planks from decades past, scrubbed and polished by generations of caretakers. The sensory memory of the space, its cedar scent, the faint hum of the distant vineyard sprinklers, the occasional creak of floorboards blended with the unnatural hum of modern machinery generators, battery-powered lights, and the whine of a nearby filtration system. Every sound reminded her that life had continued, while the photo was now already traveling across phones and networks she had no control over. Her mind turned, as it often did in moments of overwhelming pressure, to minutiae: the buttons on the borrowed shirt, the slight unevenness of her towel's fold, the tiny scratch on the ceramic sink where she had rested her elbow the night before, details that had no significance to anyone else, but to her signaled the fragility of appearances. She realized she was trembling slightly, though whether from shock, embarrassment, or residual adrenaline, she could not tell. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, straightened the shirt, and tried to breathe through the anxiety pooling in her chest. The ring itself seemed to amplify the sensation. It glimmered under the soft, fluorescent light, catching on the thin metal fibers embedded in the cedar, reflecting a green hue that made it impossible to ignore. She lifted her hand, turning it slowly, noting the way the color shifted against her skin, and for a moment allowed herself the luxury of imagining it gone, vanished like a half-forgotten dream. But reality was insistent, and the notifications on her phone grew more urgent. Board messages began to appear, queries about her status, polite yet probing questions regarding her relationship with Graham. Social media added commentary, some silly, some serious, all speculating in ways she could not control. Clara pressed her palm against the cool countertop, feeling the solid surface beneath her fingers. The weight of perception, of assumption, seemed heavier than any physical object in the room. She remembered the guests she had assisted during the night, the elderly couple struggling with smoke inhalation, the young mother calming her frightened child, the staff guiding everyone with quiet efficiency. Each act had been done with careful attention, thoughtfulness, and care, and now, in a single image, the entire story had been stripped of nuance, condensed into a fleeting moment misunderstood by strangers. A deep exhale rose through her chest, mingling with the faint scent of eucalyptus and ash that drifted in from the sprinklers. Clara's mind raced through potential responses, options that would allow her to explain, to clarify, to salvage both her professional reputation and the dignity of everyone who had relied on her during the night's emergency. Yet every path seemed fraught with visibility she was not ready for, conversations she was not yet prepared to have. She glanced at the sleeping staff again, their trust silent but palpable, and felt a surge of resolve. Finally. Clara slid her hand over the countertop, letting the ring press against the fabric of the shirt, and tucked it into the pocket of the borrowed garment. She straightened her back, feeling the muscle memory of responsibility tighten across her shoulders. There was work to do. The morning demanded focus, calm, and efficiency, regardless of the absurdity now documented for the world to see. She would navigate the misperceptions, she decided, but not without holding on to the truth of her actions and the life she actually led. Outside, the morning mist swirled over the rows of grapevines, and the sprinklers cast rainbows through the haze. Clara paused at the doorway, letting the cool light wash over her face, drawing in a long, steady breath. This was Sonoma. This was her life, and whatever stories had begun to circulate, she would meet the day with the same careful attention, empathy, and resolve she had carried through the smoke, the alarm, and the night before. With a final glance at the safe room, at the blankets, the oxygen canisters, and the quietly resting staff, Clara stepped out, heels clicking lightly against the tile. Her mind rehearsed the conversations ahead, the messages she would have to answer, the board she would address. Yet, beneath the anxiety, there was calm, a recognition that she was prepared, capable, and grounded in what mattered: the photograph, the rumor, the unexpected ring. They were only a fragment of a larger, more tangible truth. As the sunlight shifted across the cedar panels, brushing the dust motes that floated like tiny lanterns in the air, Clara Whitfield tucked the small bag containing the ring securely under her arm. She squared her shoulders, feeling the weight of responsibility balanced with a newfound clarity. Today, she would face the consequences, but she would also remember the quiet heroism of the night before the moments no one would see, but that had made all the difference. Her phone buzzed again, a small reminder that the world outside was waiting. Clara inhaled, soft and deliberate, then exhaled, letting the tension flow from her shoulders. She walked toward the vineyard gate, the cool morning air filling her lungs, knowing the path ahead would demand focus, diplomacy, and courage. And somewhere deep inside, she allowed herself the small, rebellious hope that perhaps, after all, this unintended story could mark not just chaos, but opportunity. Before the headlines and rumors could fully reach her, Clara Whitfield was back in her small rental apartment, arranging her father's pills in the plastic organizer that lived on the kitchen table. The compartments clicked softly beneath her fingertips. Morning, noon, and evening doses lined in neat rows, her handwriting labeling each square with care. The sun slanted across chipped mugs on the counter, their handles mismatched from years of yard sale finds. She lifted one, felt the familiar crack in the glaze, and filled it with lukewarm coffee from the pot she had brewed before dawn. Ordinary life pressed in around her like a steady tide, persistent, quiet, and inescapable. On the shelf above the table sat a glass jar with a taped label, the words written in her slanted cursive Harbor Light events. A handful of crumpled bills and coins glittered inside, the accumulation of skipped dinners out, extra shifts, and careful planning. Beside it rested her laptop, its screen open to a spreadsheet marked with tabs and color codes, vendor estimates, venue options, projected costs, and fundraising strategies. It was her dream, outlined in formulas and notes, the hope that one day she could build a company dedicated to nonprofit events, the kind that brought real light to communities. For now, though, the jar looked small and the numbers demanding. Clara pulled on her secondhand sneakers, tugging the laces tight until the knots pressed into her palms. She smoothed the creases of her navy skirt, tucked her planner into her tote bag, and slipped her phone inside the outer pocket. At 6:10, she locked the door behind her, stepping into the cool morning air that carried the faint tang of eucalyptus and ash drifting down from the valley. At 6:15, she caught the bus, its worn vinyl seats familiar beneath her, its steady rumble carrying her toward a day filled with more questions than answers. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Maggie Pierce, her best friend since college, now a nurse at the county hospital. Breathe, Whitfield. Headlines pass. Your work speaks louder. Coffee on me tonight if you survive the board meeting. Clara smiled despite herself, picturing Maggie's steady eyes, her hair always pulled back, her hands quick and competent. Maggie never used too many words, but each one carried weight. Clara typed back quickly, promising to meet if she wasn't still at the estate by nightfall. She let her head rest against the bus window, cool glass pressing into her temple, and wondered about Graham Caldwell, the man whose name was suddenly tied with hers in the wrong way. At that very moment, she imagined, he was likely out on his sunrise run, shoes striking pavement in measured rhythm. His life, she knew, was carved by disciplined memorial breakfasts set quietly in honor of his late wife, careful routines with his son, a household that held grief and order in equal measure. Their worlds could not have been more different, his built on acres of vineyard and marble foyers, hers balanced on chipped mugs and handwritten reminders taped to walls. Yet, for reasons she could not fully untangle, the photograph had woven their names together. Clara pulled her planner from her tote, opening to the week ahead, her handwriting sprawled in careful loops across the pages. Founder's Gola circled in blue ink, arrows pointing to task lists she had already memorized. The gala was not just another event. It was the one night of the year when the foundation's donors gathered under chandeliers and oak beams. Pledges scribbled on cards that turned into real programs: food for the pantry, supplies for the shelters, funds for after-school lessons. She had counted linens, drafted seating charts, and checked allergy lists twice. Every detail carried responsibility. She could not afford distraction. Not now. Her phone chimed again. A voicemail this time. Clara pressed play, holding the speaker close to her ear as the bus lurched forward. The voice of a board member, smooth, practiced, and edged with polite concern. Optics. Clara. prepare a statement. We'll need clarity before the gala. Nothing dramatic, just enough to keep donors comfortable. The calm authority hid an urgency she could feel through the pause before each sentence. They were already calculating the risk she represented, and she had not even left her apartment. Clara slipped the phone back into her tote, her stomach tightening. She turned a page in her planner, let her pen rest against the margin, and forced her breath to slow. Responsibility was no stranger to her. It had shaped her since her father's diagnosis, since Maggie had steadied her through night shifts and broken paychecks. She had learned long ago that the ordinary weight of care, the pillboxes, the bus rides, the cracked mugs was heavy, but it could also anchor her. She whispered a silent reminder to herself, the words steady in her chest. Ordinary is where strength grows. The bus hissed to a stop. Clara rose, adjusted the strap on her tote, and stepped down onto the sidewalk, her sneakers meeting the cracked pavement. Around her, the world moved on in its familiar rhythm, vendors lifting shutters on shop fronts, joggers crossing streets, children clutching backpacks as they hurried toward school buses. For them, it was another Thursday morning. For her, it was the quiet breath before a storm she could already feel building. As she walked, Clara touched the edge of her planner again, grounding herself in its pages. The gala would arrive in just a few days, and with it, decisions that could alter not only her reputation, but the very future of the programs she believed in. She lifted her chin, inhaled the crisp air, and carried herself forward. The thought repeating like a pulse in her mind this weekend would shift everything. Safety plans and checklists turned a working barn into a ballroom, though Clara Whitfield knew most guests would never notice the invisible scaffolding beneath the evening's shimmer. She moved quickly between tables, smoothing linens until their edges aligned perfectly with the barrels lining the room. String lights glowed in loops overhead, their warm gold reflections softening the oak beams. Hand-lettered place cards rested at each setting, the ink drying in elegant curves that would guide guests to their seats without fuss. Behind the charm and sparkle, she carried a mental inventory with precision. Maps of the exits were taped discreetly on doors, arrows drawn by her careful hand. Oxygen tanks stood tucked behind a curtain, blankets stacked in a cedar chest, bottled water labeled and arranged in neat rows. A faint eucalyptus scent drifted from a diffuser in the safe room, meant to calm nerves should the night take an unexpected turn. Clara whispered a silent hope that no one would ever need to see those preparations, that the sparkle would remain intact, leaving the safety net unnoticed. The first guests arrived just as the final place cards settled on the last table. Retired teachers in pressed jackets, vintners with sun-weathered faces, a former mayor leaning on his cane with measured pride. Each arrival carried a story, woven into the fabric of the foundation that had brought them together. Clara stood near the entrance, tablet in hand, checking names off quietly as coats were taken, and champagne glasses offered. She noted who smiled broadly, who looked weary, who clutched their invitations as though afraid they might lose their place in the world of crystal chandeliers and barrel-aged elegance. One woman in particular drew Clara's attention, an elderly donor with silver hair pulled back in a careful bun, her hands wrapped tightly around a small velvet box. The donor's knuckles trembled slightly as she greeted Graham Caldwell with warmth. Clara noted the box but kept her eyes lowered, her role not to question, but to ensure comfort. She would make sure a chair with extra support waited at the table for the woman, that her meal arrived without delay, that the evening strain did not weigh too heavily on her fragile frame. The labor was endless, yet invisible. Allergy icons were printed discreetly on menus, her handwriting circling those with peanut sensitivities. Extra chairs were slipped into corners for sudden needs, and water pitchers were refreshed before anyone noticed them empty. She timed transitions in her head when speeches should pause for refills, when servers needed to move quietly along aisles, when the background quartet ought to shift from lilting waltzes to more upbeat notes. It was orchestration without applause, and she felt both the satisfaction and the solitude of it. Across the room, Graham shook hands with a senator, his posture formal yet approachable. Cameras caught the angle of his jaw, the careful tilt of his shoulders, the practiced warmth that came from years of being both host and leader. Clara, meanwhile, kept to the shadows, watching hydration levels, guiding servers with a raised eyebrow, and checking exit paths that guests never saw. Their orbits intersected only in glances, his brief nod of acknowledgement, her subtle reassurance that all was under control. By mid-evening, the barrel room shimmered with laughter and conversation. Silverware chimed against plates, glasses clinked, and the low murmur of voices rose and fell like tides. Clara checked her watch, glanced at the safe room again, and reminded herself that vigilance was its own form of hospitality. Then, a vibration buzzed on her phone. She glanced down at the screen and felt her pulse quicken. The text alert carried a single line, wildfire flare-up. 20 miles, winds shifting. Her breath caught as she raised her eyes to the high windows above the barrels. Tiny flecks of ash drifted downward, faint but visible, like gray confetti falling into the halo of string lights. At first, it looked almost beautiful, until the scent reached her sharp, smoky, a reminder of the valley's fragility. Clara steadied herself. Guests laughed nearby, oblivious, their champagne glasses raised in toasts. She let her hand linger against the phone for a moment, pulse steadying, before looking across the room. Graham's gaze had already found hers. He stood still for the briefest second, the senator's words forgotten, his attention narrowing only to her. The look said enough they both understood. The overhead lights flickered, dimmed, then returned, as though the room itself had taken a startled breath. Clara pressed her lips together, nodding once toward Graham. The moment stretched between them, silent, urgent, certain. Move quickly, move carefully, do not alarm the guests. She adjusted her tote strap, checked her watch, and prepared to pivot. Every detail she had set in place, the maps, the tanks, the blankets, was no longer hypothetical. The gala had entered a new chapter, and she would need every ounce of calm to carry them through. Smoke curled under the doors first, thin gray ribbons slipping through seams that had seemed so tight when the night began. A violin note caught mid-bow, quivered, then fell silent. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The hum of safety flickered out like a candle pinched too soon. Clara Whitfield rose from her chair near the service table, steady as if this were all a drill she had practiced 100 times. Her breath deepened, not for herself, but for the dozens of pairs of eyes already scanning the room for someone who appeared to know what to do. Her mind clicked into place. Checklist, order, calm. She moved toward the first cluster of guests, where a woman in her 80s pressed a handkerchief over her nose. "This way, please." Clara's voice carried not command, but reassurance, low and certain. She guided them gently toward the safe room, hand resting on an elbow, steps measured so no one would stumble. Graham Caldwell was already there. He had rolled his sleeves, jacket discarded, and stood shoulder to shoulder with guests instead of apart. A case of bottled water rested at his feet. He lifted them two at a time, passing them into waiting hands. His voice was low, almost conversational, but threaded with quiet authority. He crouched beside an older man who confessed to bouts of vertigo, steadying his shoulders, reminding him to take slow breaths. When Graham rose again, his eyes swept the room, pausing on his son who leaned against a pillar, hand pressed to his chest. In 2 strides, he was at the boy's side, checking the inhaler clipped to his belt, a nod, a squeeze of reassurance, then back into the stream of movement. Clara caught Maggie Pierce's arrival from the corner of her eye. Maggie, ever practical, carried a canvas tote bristling with inhalers, bandages, and wet cloths. They fell into rhythm without speaking. Maggie pressed supplies into Clara's hands, and Clara moved from guest to guest, checking breath sounds, offering cloths dampened with cool water. Maggie redirected servers toward carrying pitchers, converting trays once meant for canapes into vessels for rolled, damp towels. The elderly donor with the velvet box trembled visibly as smoke seeped further into the barn. Clara knelt beside her chair, eyes level, and reached out without hesitation. "You're safe. Sit with me." She placed the chair near the oscillating fan by the emergency table, positioning the donor so the flow of air lifted the strain from her chest. The woman's fingers clutched the box tighter, but her breathing steadied. Clara slipped her own hand over the wrinkled knuckles for a moment, long enough to say without words that she was not alone. The room developed a new rhythm. Water bottles passed hand to hand. Cloths pressed gently to temples and wrists. Voices lowered, humor attempted here and there, laughter trembling but present. Reassurance was woven through repetition. You're fine. The air is clearing. We are safe. Clara's steps carried her in widening circles, returning always to Maggie's side for refills, pausing once to nod to Graham as he adjusted the window coverings to block drifting ash. Then, the lights dipped, once, twice, then vanished completely. Darkness wrapped the room, sudden and absolute. For 5 seconds, no sound moved but the uneven catch of frightened breaths. Someone gasped. A glass toppled with a small crash. In that gap of sightless silence, Clara felt her own heart race against her ribs. Yet her hands did not falter. The backup generator caught with a heavy click. Lights bloomed again, dimmer but steady. The string lights glowed weak gold. The fans resumed their steady hum. The diffuser resumed its quiet exhale of eucalyptus. Relief whispered across the room in unison. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, not Graham, not the staff, but Clara. And in their silence, she read the truth. They respected her calm. They trusted her. The smoke still pressed at the walls, but the panic had ebbed, replaced by quiet obedience to her checklist. She spoke sparingly, conserving words for those who most needed them. A sip of water here, a reminder of breath there. Graham's presence loomed strong, but did not overshadow hers. They worked in tandem, visible proof that leadership could be both steady and kind. As the night deepened, a pocket of stillness formed, almost by accident. Guests, comforted for the moment, settled into their seats, murmuring among themselves. Maggie retreated to check supplies, leaving Clara briefly alone. She pressed the damp towel against her own wrist, savoring the coolness, and let her shoulders sag for a heartbeat. Across the safe room, Graham straightened from helping a guest into a chair. His gaze found hers through the quiet, lingering long enough to say what words could not. Gratitude, recognition, something else layered beneath, unspoken but undeniable. For the first time all night, Clara allowed herself to hold the look, just long enough to feel it, just long enough to know it might change something. The alarms had faded, leaving the barn wrapped in a quiet more intimate than music. Generators hummed softly, string lights glowed faintly, and guests spoke in hushed tones as if raising their voices might break the fragile safety they now clung to. Clara Whitfield sat at the edge of the safe room, shoulders finely lowered after hours of vigilance. A half-empty water bottle rested in her hands. The condensation slid down her fingers, reminding her she was still here, still steady. Across the room, Graham Caldwell leaned against a post, his sleeves still rolled, his shirt clinging faintly with sweat. For once he did not look like a man carrying a fortune and a board's expectations. He looked like someone weary, human, and unguarded. His son had settled with Maggie on a blanket, inhaler beside him. With that reassurance, Graham's eyes found Clara's. It was he who crossed the distance first, steps unhurried, carrying no agenda but presence. He crouched beside her chair, lowering himself so they sat nearly eye level. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of fans filled the space. The quiet stretched until Clara broke it. "I spend most mornings counting pills," she said softly. "My father's heart medication. My mother's reminders scrawled on sticky notes around the kitchen. It's my routine before the bus, before the office." She had never spoken this aloud to anyone outside Maggie, yet the words tumbled out, simple and unadorned. "And when I get home, I look at the jar on my counter, the one labeled Harbor Light Events. That's my dream. An event company for nonprofits, galas, fundraisers, small gatherings that matter. I've been saving one grocery dollar at a time." Her voice caught. She feared it sounded foolish against the backdrop of oak barrels and chandeliers. But Graham only nodded, as though her words were the most logical thing in the world. "I know something about waiting," he said quietly. His hand rested on his knee, fingers curling and uncurling as if steadying memory. 3 years ago, I lost my wife. Cancer. We fought until there was nothing left to fight. I've learned how to parent alone, how to stand in boardrooms when my chest felt hollow. I'm still learning how to live under the weight of being watched by investors, by the community, by my own son." His voice thickened, but he did not turn away. "People expect strength, but some nights, I'm just trying to remember how to cook pasta without burning it." Clara studied him, noting the rawness in his tone. Respect rose first, not attraction. Respect for the man who carried loss without letting it sour into bitterness. Respect for the father who checked his son's breath before shaking another senator's hand. "You keep it together for everyone else," she said gently. "And you do the same," he replied. Different stage, same weight. Their eyes held, and something settled between them. Not romance, not yet, but a mutual recognition of competence and heart. Two people who had both learned how to carry lives beyond their own. The moment might have deepened further, but a voice interrupted. A young volunteer hurried into the room, cheeks flushed from running. "Ms. Whitfield?" His tone carried urgency. Clara stood at once, heart racing. "Yes, the elderly patron, the woman with the velvet box, she's searching for her ring. She thinks it's missing." Clara exhaled slowly, nodding. Her gaze flicked toward Graham for half a second before she stepped past the volunteer, her pace brisk but controlled, back into the dim-lit space, weaving between chairs. She found the silver-haired woman already on her feet, hands trembling, eyes wide with panic. "I had it," the donor whispered. "It was right here. And now—" Clara reached out, steadying the woman's hand with her own. "We'll find it, step by step." She knelt, guiding her gently back into the chair, pressing a cool cloth into her palm. Her own fingers brushed the edge of her pocket where the platinum green ring still rested. Heavy, complicated, waiting to surface. The safe room quiet, held steady, but inside Clara's chest a storm gathered. The story of the ring was about to complicate everything. The silver-haired patron's hand trembled as she pressed the velvet box into Clara's palm. "Keep it safe for me until the smoke clears," she whispered. Her voice was frail, her eyes glassy with both exhaustion and fear. Clara hesitated, then closed her fingers around the box. It felt heavier than it should, as though it carried not only the weight of platinum and stone, but generations of promises. Later, when the patron drifted into uneasy sleep under Maggie's watchful eye, Clara opened the box just enough to glimpse its treasure, a ring, platinum band, crowned with a green stone that gleamed even under the dim hum of generator light. It was too valuable, too fragile to be left unguarded. Without overthinking, Clara slid it onto her own finger. Just for safekeeping, she told herself. Her hands were steady. She was awake. She was responsible. For now, it was the safest place it could be. The safe room buzzed with low conversations, water bottles half drained, guests leaning against walls or huddled on blankets. The generator's vibration filled the air like a heartbeat, constant and reassuring. Smoke still pressed faintly against the sealed doors, but within these walls, there was rhythm again. The door opened softly, letting in a rush of cooler air. Sloane Redding, the Foundation's communications officer, slipped inside. She carried a camera slung across her shoulder, already snapping quiet frames, guests resting, staff offering water, Graham steadying an anxious hand. Sloane's talent was finding dignity in crisis. Images that reassured donors later that leadership had been calm, prepared, unwavering. Tonight, though, the angles shifted. Clara noticed her only in passing, busy with a frightened teenager whose asthma monitor beeped too rapidly. Clara knelt, coaxing the girl into slow breaths. The girl's dress, delicate silk, was stained with ash. Clara unbuttoned the monogrammed shirt Graham had left draped over a chair and helped the teen slip into it for warmth. The sleeves fell past her wrists, the fabric offering comfort where words could not. The girl's breath steadied, and Clara smoothed the collar gently, her own pulse finally slowing. She moved again, adjusting blankets, checking the elderly donor's pulse, reminding guests to sip water. She barely felt the ring against her skin anymore, only the faint coolness when her hand brushed the bottle. The night blurred into a cycle of reassurances. Hours passed. One by one, the guests dozed in their chairs. The quartet instruments, abandoned on a side table, gleamed in the low light. Maggie leaned back, eyes closed, but ears alert. Graham rested against the doorframe, his son tucked under a borrowed quilt at his side. Clara allowed herself to sit at last, spine straight, eyes open, the ring still snug on her finger. She could not risk falling asleep. She had promised. The generator droned steadily, filling every pause in conversation, covering every rustle of movement. Its sound became the room's anchor, a steady hum that told them the world outside might be dangerous. But here, for now, there was safety. It was in that space when weariness blurred vigilance that Sloane's lens captured something unintended. Clara, rising from her seat, towel still looped loosely around her shoulders from damp cloths. The ring glinting unmistakably on her hand as she steadied herself against the tiled wall of the adjoining bathroom. The angle was unflattering, accidental even, but it framed a story that did not exist. Click. The shutter was soft, but the impact immediate. Clara had no idea in that moment. She continued her rounds, handing water to a man with dry lips, adjusting a fan toward the elderly patron, smoothing the frightened teenager's hair as she drifted into sleep. The ring was just there, present in every gesture, catching light it was never meant to catch. Outside the barn, ash continued to fall, soft and deceptive, like gray snowflakes drifting onto the vineyard rows. The world slept fitfully. Inside, Clara carried her quiet duty until exhaustion pulled at her eyelids. She let her head rest briefly against the bathroom's cool tile, only to steady herself, never truly giving in. Unseen. The photograph left the room. Sloane uploaded it with others, intending to craft a record of resilience, a gallery of proof that Caldwell Ridge had weathered crisis with grace. The image traveled faster than she could imagine. Before dawn, before explanations. It would already be moving beyond control, framed not as calm stewardship, but as scandal. The hum of the generator held steady through the night, but another hum was beginning, invisible and unstoppable, the hum of whispers, texts, and reposts. Clara adjusted the towel around her shoulders. Unaware, the ring stayed on her finger, its weight familiar now, even comforting. She promised herself she would return it the moment the smoke cleared. She did not yet know that by then. The ring would belong to an entirely different story. The first light over Sonoma carried no peace. It was a pale, strained dawn, the kind that blurred smoke with fog until the horizon itself seemed uncertain. Ash still clung to the edges of vineyard leaves, dulling their usual green. The fire had shifted course overnight, sparing the ridge, but its presence lingered in the air. Inside the barn, staff moved with quiet discipline, blankets folded, oxygen canisters restacked, bottles of water lined neatly on tables once meant for champagne. The scent of eucalyptus still hung faintly, mingling with smoke. It looked like order restored, though Clara felt the pulse of disorder quickening elsewhere. Her phone buzzed again and again. At first she ignored it, assuming it was Maggie checking on her, but when she glanced down, her breath caught. The screen lit with headlines that had spread faster than wildfire. Bathroom fiancée foundation secretary caught in smoky scandal. Ring sparks questions about Caldwell Ridge Gala. She scrolled with a tight chest. The photograph stared back at her, the accidental frame Sloane had captured, her hand, ring gleaming, towel draped across her shoulders, the unmistakable pattern of bathroom tile behind her. No caption explained the truth. Instead, commentary filled the gaps. Secret engagement, overnight affair, a love story written in ash. Clara pressed the phone to her chest, as though hiding it might slow the story down. But already texts poured in from board members and donors. Polite but urgent. Statement needed immediately. Optics critical. We must clarify the narrative. Calm language covering panic. Across the room. Sloane Redding entered with polished calm. Hair sleek. Blouse crisp. Camera poised. She moved deliberately, photographing tidy blankets, bottled water arranged like soldiers, Graham greeting guests with weary steadiness. Each click was an attempt to seize back control, to frame the night not as scandal, but as resilience. Her eyes flicked once toward Clara, unreadable, before returning to her lens. Clara slipped the ring from her finger. Its cool weight left a faint imprint on her skin. She held it inside her palm as she approached the elderly donor, who now rested in a quieter corner of the barn. The woman's hands trembled again when Clara knelt beside her. "You kept it safe," the donor whispered. Clara nodded and placed the ring back into her hand. "It never left my care." Her tone carried a private certainty, as though the exchange might erase the misunderstanding already burning its way through feeds and headlines. The donor closed her fingers around it with relief. But no one else saw. The truth had happened in quiet, while the lie raced loud. Outside, a van rolled into the gravel lot, its antenna extended skyward, satellite dish gleaming against morning haze. Local news. Clara caught the reflection in the barn window, her stomach twisting. "Already," staff whispered. Guests who had stayed overnight glanced at their phones. Murmurs carrying the word fiancée through the air like smoke. Clara's pulse quickened as another buzz lit her phone. This one from finance. A single line. Major donor, freezing six-figure pledge. Uncertainty about optics. Her throat tightened. She read the sentence twice, hoping it would change. But it stayed fixed, black against the glow of the screen. Proof that rumor carried weight heavier than truth. For a moment, she stood still, the barn's hum pressing around her. She thought of her savings jar at home, the label Harbor Light events peeling at the corners. One rumor could unravel years of planning, not only hers, but the foundation's, the scholarships it funded, the families it served. Her eyes lifted across the room. Graham was speaking quietly with staff, his presence steady, but his jaw was set, his expression storm dark. He had seen the headlines, too. He had seen what they implied about him, about them, and though his gaze softened when it met hers, the tension in the air grew heavier. The barn felt smaller with every passing minute. Phones buzzed, whispers swelled. A polished camera shutter clicked again, capturing order that did not match the truth swelling outside. Clara straightened, tucking her planner under her arm. Her voice, when she finally spoke to Maggie, was even. "They've called an emergency board meeting." Maggie's brows lifted. When noon, Clara steadied her breath. "My next steps will decide whether this place survives the scandal or falls with it." The barrel room, stripped of linens and music, no longer resembled a gala space. Morning light seeped through high windows, pale and cold. The long table usually reserved for tastings now held printouts, screenshots, and scattered pens. Phones buzzed only to be silenced with quick, guilty glances. No one wanted their ringtone breaking the tense air. Clara sat near the end, planner open, pen in hand, though her fingers trembled. She had not slept. Not really. The headlines still pulsed in her mind, phrases etched sharper than ash on glass. Bathroom fiancé. Scandal under the string lights. Each word was heavier than truth. Sloane Redding, composed as always, leaned forward, tapping a nail against a stack of photographs. "Optics," she said evenly, "are the currency of trust. Right now, we're bankrupt." Her gaze swept the table, avoiding Clara's directly but brushing past her like a cool wind. "The simplest course is separation. We distance the foundation from Ms. Whitfield, a clean line, before donations collapse further." Clara felt her cheeks burn. Separation. It sounded clinical, like excising a problem rather than recognizing a person. Graham's chair scraped softly as he leaned forward. His sleeves were still rolled, hair untamed, but his voice was calm steel. Clara kept this room standing when smoke threatened to bring it down. She organized safety drills before donors even knew they needed them. She's not a liability. She's the reason last night didn't unravel. A murmur rippled down the table. Some board members avoided his eyes. Others exchanged careful glances. Clara lowered her gaze to her planner, drawing a small square in the margin just to keep her hand steady. Budgets came next. A treasurer cleared his throat, listing Pa's pledges like a tolling bell. 2 six-figure gifts under review. Several mid-tier donors expressing hesitation. Volunteers are worried about association. He shuffled papers nervously. We may need to scale back programming. The words sliced sharper than rumor. Clara pictured the children whose scholarships depended on those funds. The clinics that relied on the gala's proceeds. It was more than image. It was meals, books, medicine. She swallowed, then spoke, voice quiet but firm. If stepping aside will save the programs, I'll resign. The silence after her words was heavier than the smoke had been. Every eye turned to her, and for a moment she wished she could sink into the oak floorboards. Graham broke it. No. He pushed the word forward like a shield. You will not resign. His gaze swept the table. Daring contradiction. If anyone needs convincing, I'll make it clear Clara has my full confidence. In fact, I'm giving her authority to lead the next 6 events independently. Complete discretion. The room stirred, shock shifting in subtle movements. Sloane's brow arched. Treasurer's pen stilled mid-note. A few whispers rose, then died under Graham's steady look. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. Authority. Independent leadership. It sounded impossible, yet his tone made it certain. She drew in a breath. Her resignation offer had been meant as a shield, not a negotiation. Yet here was something entirely different, a door opening she had not dared imagine. Slowly, she closed her planner, resting her palms flat on the cover. Then I accept. Her voice did not waver. I'll take full responsibility for the events. Their success or failure will rest with me. The declaration hung in the air, heavier than any rumor, not a secretary's quiet contribution, but a partner's acceptance of risk. For the first time all morning, Graham's shoulders eased. The faintest trace of approval softened his features, though his eyes remained storm-dark. Sloane leaned back, arms crossed. Then the narrative must be managed carefully. She said, You've drawn a line in the sand. Clara, don't step back from it. Clara nodded once. Inside, her chest was still tight, but beneath it, a flicker of resolve burned steady. The headlines might twist her story, but here, in this room, she had claimed her part of it. As the meeting adjourned, whispers continued in corners, pens scratched final notes, and phones buzzed again. But Clara walked out with her planner under her arm, her steps even. By the time she reached the barn doors, another message awaited her, a rumor spreading already this time about the ring, a family statement someone claimed was being prepared. Its release could turn the tide, one way or another. Clara paused on the gravel, the morning air still carrying smoke. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. The lines had been drawn. Now she had to live with what she had chosen. The announcement came in the late morning, a single-page statement released by the elderly donor's family. The heirloom ring, it read, had been entrusted to Clara Whitfield only for safekeeping during the wildfire scare. It had no connection to Graham Caldwell, no secret engagement, no scandal. The words were plain, clipped, almost cold, but their simplicity carried weight. Relief rippled first through the board, then across donor circles, and finally into the wider press. Local outlets updated their stories with muted corrections, swapping fiancée for foundation staff. The more reckless headlines were buried under new updates about the fire containment. Online. Chatter continued but softened, as if the wind had shifted and people's attention followed it elsewhere. Clara read the statement 3 times before setting her phone down. Her hands still trembled, but her breath flowed more easily. The truth was out, though the sting of rumor lingered. She knew reputations did not always recover as quickly as headlines. That afternoon, Graham asked her to meet him in the library, the same cedar-lined space where the night had begun. The air smelled faintly of smoke and lemon polish. Books towered on high shelves, sunlight filtering through dust, still unsettled from the night's chaos. He stood near the wide oak desk, a small box resting in his palm. Clara's heart stuttered before her mind steadied her. Not another misunderstanding. Not another heirloom. He opened it slowly, revealing a simple peridot band. Green as vineyard leaves in high summer, modest compared to the heirloom's brilliance, but clear, strong, and deliberate. "This isn't what it looks like," Graham said before she could speak. His tone was careful, measured. "It's not a romantic gesture. It's a professional vow." She tilted her head, wary. "A vow." He nodded, seed funding for Harbor Light events. Enough to move it from savings jars and spreadsheets into reality. This band, he paused, eyes meeting hers, isn't about ownership. It's about partnership. A visible symbol that you're not just staff. You're leading. Clara reached for the box, fingers brushing the smooth wood. She stared at the ring inside, the green stone catching light with quiet fire. It was beautiful, yes. But more than that, it was grounded, not a jewel meant to dazzle, but one meant to endure. Still, she lifted her chin. If this is to mean something, it needs to be on clear terms. A contract, written authority, defined reporting lines, and public transparency. Won't be part of another story written by someone else's lens. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Graham's expression remained unreadable, then softened into something like respect. "Agreed. We'll draft it together. Every line." She let out a slow breath. "And the band?" "A work vow," he repeated. "Not personal, not yet. This is you claiming your place, and me promising to stand behind you as you do." Clara closed the box, holding it lightly in her hands. The weight was not romantic, not sentimental, but purposeful. For the first time, she felt her dream of Harbor Light events move from fragile idea into something tangible. She set the box on the desk, slid the band onto her right hand, and watched the green glint catch in the afternoon sun. Her pulse steadied. A vow, yes, but one she chose for herself. The library held its breath as she flexed her fingers, the band settling against her skin. Not a bathroom rumor, not a viral headline, not someone else's heirloom. This was hers chosen, deliberate, professional. Graham nodded once, as if sealing the contract without ink. Trust flickered there. Fragile, but real. Clara looked at the shelves around her, the books lined with years of history, and felt something shift. Respect had been forged in fire and smoke, tempered by rumor, and now it settled into something steadier. Mutual recognition. Shared purpose. The hum of the generator outside reminded her the crisis was not fully behind them, but her path had taken a new direction. One no headline could erase. Reputation was not repaired by statements or headlines. Clara learned that quickly. It was repaired in the quiet weight of folding tables, the scratch of pens across name tags, the soft murmur of volunteers arriving early to carry boxes. The farmer's market smelled of apples and soil, cinnamon drifting from a nearby stall where pies cooled on wire racks. Clara stood at the edge of the square with her planner in hand, quilt draped across her arm. She had borrowed it from Maggie's cedar chest, squares of faded fabric stitched by Maggie's grandmother. She spread it carefully across a hay bale, smoothing each edge until it lay neat. Soon the bales became benches, quilts layered over them in mismatched comfort. Volunteers bustled around her. Teenagers hung signs written in thick marker food bank fundraiser. Every dollar feeds a family. A mother passed recipe cards across the table, each printed with instructions for soups that stretched ingredients across several meals. Mason jars filled with dried beans lined the edge like ornaments. It was not glamorous, but it was tangible. Clara felt the ground beneath her feet steadier here than in any ballroom. On the far side of the square, a different tent rose, this one for veterans seeking work. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of men and women in pressed shirts, resumes clutched in calloused hands. Clara had insisted on printers nearby, ready for reprints. She watched as volunteers guided veterans from table to table, shaking hands with local employers. Each exchange, each nod, was small but significant. A man with a silver beard left smiling, resume lighter. Pocket full of business cards. By late afternoon, the market square transformed again. Long tables stretched end to end, candles flickering in jam jars. Neighbors carried casserole dishes, loaves of bread, baskets of apples. Someone set down a steaming tray of roasted squash, its caramelized scent rising like a hymn. Clara walked the length of the tables, adjusting chairs, checking that plates were set evenly, pausing to greet each volunteer by name. The harvest supper began with clinking cutlery and voices weaving gratitude through the evening air. Stories spilled across tables, memories of hard winters, laughter about burnt pies, whispered thanks for food secured through programs they now supported. Clara's chest swelled with quiet pride. This was what Harbor Light events was meant to be, gatherings where dignity and community intertwined. Graham arrived as the candles burned lower, his presence steady but unobtrusive. He spoke only when asked, offering thanks to volunteers, acknowledging the veterans, nodding to local families with genuine warmth. He kept his distance from the spotlight, allowing Clara's leadership to shine. She caught his glance once across the table, his eyes saying without words, "This is yours. Own it." And she did. Every clipboard, every checklist, every small correction. Her voice guided servers, her hands rearranged chairs, her smile reassured the nervous. By evening's end, the event ran like a song she had composed herself, each verse clear, each chorus steady. The climax came quietly, not with applause but with a post on the food bank's account. Clara saw it on her phone as she packed quilts into Maggie's basket. Winter hours secured, shelves stocked, community cared for. Thank you. The words were plain, but beneath them were numbers, meals counted, dollars raised, hours extended, proof in figures that trust was not only restored, but renewed. Clara closed her phone slowly, hands still resting on the screen. Around her, volunteers stacked chairs, children chased each other through fading light, and candles guttered in glass jars. It was not glamorous, but it was solid. For the first time since the wildfire night, she felt the tension in her chest release. Not fully, but enough to draw a deep breath without the taste of smoke. Graham approached as she loaded the last bale onto the truck. "You rebuilt something tonight," he said quietly. Clara shook her head. "We did. The community did." He smiled faintly, not arguing. Respect, again, was in his silence. As the truck rumbled away and the square emptied, Clara lingered. The quilt folded under her arm smelled faintly of smoke and apple pie. She thought of the peridot band on her right hand, catching the last light of evening. It was not glamour, not romance. It was commitment to work, to trust, to something bigger than herself. Her phone buzzed again, a notification. This time, not from donors or the food bank, but from a national magazine. She tapped it reluctantly. From bathroom fiancée to community face, Clara Whitfield's unlikely story. The headline teased a longer piece. The tone seemed softer than scandal, but the phrase was still there. Bathroom fiancée. It clung like ash, ready to ignite tension again. Clara slipped the phone back into her bag, shoulders steadying. The work was far from over. Success tonight was only the first step. The next storm was already building. The article dropped at sunrise. Its title glowed across Clara's phone screen like a spark too close to dry grass. The bathroom fiancée behind the smoke at Caldwell Ridge. The words burned before she even scrolled. Inside, the magazine had pieced together old photos, one of Clara arranging linens at last year's gala, another of Graham standing at a podium, Another blurred image from the wildfire night. Alone. They meant little. Together. They created insinuation, the illusion of a hidden story. Sloane's name was in the byline. Clara read each line slowly, her breath shallow. Words like questions remain, and unconfirmed closeness threaded the paragraphs. No direct accusation, but suggestion. It was enough. Media outlets picked it up by mid-morning, resharing, reframing, amplifying. The narrative Clara had worked so carefully to mend was pulled taut again, ready to snap. By noon, the foundation board scheduled a confidence vote. If they wavered, critical programs would collapse. Clara felt the weight settle in her chest, heavier than smoke ever had. Then, her phone rang not with another headline, but with Maggie's voice, tight with urgency. "Clara, it's your dad. Arrhythmia. We're at county. He's stable, but you need to come." The hospital smelled of antiseptic and worry. Clara's shoes squeaked against linoleum as she hurried down corridors lined with muted posters about flu shots and hand washing. Her father lay propped in a narrow bed, skin pale against hospital sheets, monitors beeping steady but fragile. She brushed his hand gently, whispering reassurance even as her own heart raced. Maggie met her in the hall, steady as always. "He's holding. They're running tests. Sit. Breathe. I'll keep watch." Clara sank into the chair, planner still clutched in her tote. She wanted to be in two places at once, in the hospital with her father, and in the boardroom, defending programs that fed families. She pressed her palms together, head bowed, breath shallow. A quiet presence settled beside her. Graham. He said nothing at first, only sat, his large frame filling the narrow chair. His silence was not absence, it was support. When he finally spoke, his tone was low, steady. "We'll make sure both things stand. Your father, the foundation, neither will fall." Hours blurred, nurses moved in and out. Maggie handled updates with clinical calm, her texts brief but precise. At last, Graham touched Clara's shoulder. "It's time. The press conference." The auditorium lights felt harsh after hospital dimness. Cameras lined the back, microphones clustered at the podium. Clara stepped forward, her hands steady on the edge of the lectern. She spoke slowly, carefully. She clarified the timeline, named the heirloom ring for what it was, explained her role in the wildfire night without embellishment. Then she stopped. Silence hung. For the first time, she let her own truth carry. "I am not a scandal. I am a worker. I plan events that fund programs. I check pillboxes. I take buses. I am ordinary, and that is enough." The room hushed, cameras still clicking, but slower now. For once, the story did not belong to rumor. It belonged to her. That evening, the benefit supper glowed with candlelight under the same barrel beams that had once held panic. Donors filled the room, speaking not of rumors, but of programs. Hands reached for Clara, thanking her quietly, pressing notes of support into her palm. Graham kept his distance, allowing her to stand at the center. Even Maggie, who rarely praised, squeezed her hand with rare tenderness. Sloane hovered at the edges, her narrative weakened, her lens searching for control that no longer held. The board gathered one final time, tallying votes. Clara waited in silence, pulse echoing louder than the chatter around her. At last, the chair cleared his throat. Confidence retained. The words landed with the weight of both relief and exhaustion. The foundation stood. Programs secured. Clara exhaled slowly, her shoulders easing for the first time in days. Applause followed, but she barely heard it. Her gaze turned toward the doors, toward the night beyond them. She stepped outside alone. The evening air was cool, smoke finally faded, stars pricking through the velvet dark. She lifted her hand, the peridot band glimmering faintly in the lamplight. It was no jewel of scandal. It was a vow chosen, a reminder that integrity was its own quiet power. The fires were months behind them now. Vines, once touched by ash, had grown green again. The valley smelled of damp soil and eucalyptus after rain. Winter was settling gently over Sonoma, and Clara Whitfield found herself in a different kind of season. One made of steady work, renewed trust, and a sense that life could be ordinary again, but in a better way than before. Harbor Light Events had its first independent clients. Small contracts, at first a school fundraiser, a library reopening, a local veterans gathering. Each one carried weight, not in glamour, but in purpose. Clara spread receipts across her chipped kitchen table, smoothing edges with careful fingers, every column balanced, every expense justified. She had learned that attention to detail wasn't just a habit, it was a kind of care. The foundation programs continued too: job fairs, food bank hours, tutoring sessions for kids in need. When she walked into the barrel room now, it no longer felt like a place of panic and flickering lights. It felt like the heart of a community still beating strong. Volunteers nodded at her with quiet gratitude, the kind that didn't need applause. On one particular evening, Clara walked up the hill toward the renovated barn. It was crisp outside, her breath visible, her scarf pulled close. Inside, the space had been softened with warm lights and cedar beams. No guests tonight, no donors, just two people sitting near the wood stove. Graham poured cider into mismatched mugs, the steam rising between them. They didn't talk about the headlines anymore. They didn't need to. The peridot band on Clara's right hand caught the light as she wrapped her fingers around the mug. It was not a romantic promise, not yet. It was a professional vow, a symbol of trust, of work shared and work valued. Graham noticed it once, gave a small nod, and returned to his cider. That was enough. Their conversation that night lingered on ordinary things: his son's science project, Maggie's shifts at the hospital, Clara's father's recovery, and his stubborn insistence on walking laps around the block. These were the markers of a life steadying itself, not the drama of rumor or the weight of scandal. Clara listened to the crackle of the fire, felt the warmth against her palms, and let herself believe that peace, too, was earned. Later, she walked through the quiet hallways, past doors that once held frightened guests. She paused outside the cedar-lined bathroom. Its tile gleamed clean, its shelves stacked with folded towels and a small dish of eucalyptus sprigs. Once, it had been the stage for a story she never chose. Now, it had returned to its purpose: a safe room, a place of calm. She smiled faintly, resting her hand on the frame before moving on. The scandal had faded, as all stories do when truth and time work together. What remained was not the noise of social media, but the quieter truth of work done faithfully, of a community that had seen her steady hands and chosen to trust them again. Clara understood now that she did not need to chase dramatic moments. Real strength often arrived in silence, in steady persistence, in small acts that built something lasting. There was no grand twist at the end, no final spectacle, just earned stillness. A woman who kept the lights on, not only for herself, but for those around her. A valley that stood stronger after fire. A future left open, defined not by scandal, but by choices made with integrity. When Clara stepped outside into the night, stars shone crisp above the vineyard rows. The barn windows glowed warmly behind her, laughter carrying faintly from within. She looked at the peridot once more. It was not a weight now, but a reminder, a marker of beginnings, of promises still unfolding. She drew in the cool air, the scent of eucalyptus lingering. The world felt quiet, but alive. She knew tomorrow would bring more work, more lists, more ordinary tasks, and she welcomed them because they were hers to carry, steady and strong. Life rarely unravels the way we plan. Clara's story reminds us that reputation can be shaken overnight, not always by our own choices, but by how others choose to see us. Yet, beneath the noise of rumor and misunderstanding, what truly carries weight is integrity, the quiet, consistent way we show up for our families, our work, and our communities. The wildfire, the misplaced ring, and the scandal that followed were never the essence of Clara's journey. What mattered was her decision to keep moving forward, to respond with dignity instead of fear, and to build something lasting out of ordinary days. For those of us who have lived long enough to know how fragile security can be, this story offers a reminder storms will come, but we are stronger than we believe. Sometimes our greatest turning points appear in the middle of confusion, when we have no choice but to stand tall and keep faith in ourselves. So, when the world misjudges you, or life takes a turn you didn't ask for, remember Clara Whitfield's lesson. Truth and steadiness will outlast the smoke, and often, second chances arrive when we least expect them. Thank you so much for spending your time with this story. If it touched your heart, inspired you, or simply gave you something to think about, we'd be grateful if you showed your support. Please remember to like this video, share it with someone who might need the reminder, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next story. Your encouragement helps us keep bringing these heartfelt stories to life.